What's going on, you guys? It is your boy, the American F1 fan, Eric Ringle here, and I'm going to announce it now. Spoiler alert for this video. If you have not watched Drive to Survive yet, or at least the first 5 episodes, I'm going to be covering just some of the things that I saw from the first 5 episodes and maybe covering some of the major storylines of each episode. So I'm going to let you know now, if you have not watched yet and you don't want to hear spoilers, go ahead and rewatch this video after you watch the first 5 episodes. But let's talk about the first 5 episodes from Drive to Survive. So episode 1, business as usual. Obviously, the 2 big storylines that get covered in this first episode are obviously Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari and Carlos Sainz is out at Ferrari. This was a very interesting look into, the fact of what Carlos now feels like he needs to do to kind of further his career in F1. You do see Lewis and Carlos kind of interact a couple times throughout the episode. It's kind of Lewis asking maybe a question or two about Ferrari, and I think it makes you kind of feel for Carlos. It was a good decision by Lewis to move over to Ferrari, but you kind of feel for Carlos in the same instant and the way that he kind of found out. But I think Lewis, they did a really good job of covering it without really overblowing the story. It's a huge story, don't get me wrong, but I think they did a good job covering it, not just making it its own episode. Because there was one other storyline that they covered here, which I was surprised that Netflix decided to cover it. And it's the Christian Horner accusations that came out just before the 2024 season, in which Christian Horner was accused of being inappropriate with another Red Bull employee. We kind of see the evolution of this whole case and how it all played out from the beginning of the season, where initially the accusations come out. The F1 journalists and F1 pundits are asking, Christian and Red Bull about the accusations. Should he be leaving the team as the leader because of this? And, they basically stood by their man at Red Bull, which is understandable. He's telling them that the accusations are false. And it's innocent until proven guilty, not guilty until proven innocent. And, the initial investigation, they find nothing, and so they decide to move on. But then, obviously, the email comes out leaking all the alleged text messages and pictures and whatnot, and that gets leaked out to all the F1 paddock. It gets released to all the F1 journalists, and it now creates another shitstorm. And unfortunately, with that, Christian now is in a position. Christian and his wife are now in a position where now they're really having to defend the fact that he feels like he's innocent of all these charges, with all this damning alleged evidence that came out against him. And you see that Christian comes to the track with his wife, and they're trying to just focus on racing, and they obviously do a good job of that, with Red Bull winning their very first race, going 1-2 there with the 1-2 victory there. But then you see the looks that Christian's giving, because then the story comes out that Yas thinks Christian needs to go. With all of this hanging over the team's head, it's going to create issues upon issues. And you can tell just throughout this episode that Christian feels like something is totally up, especially with Yas being so pushy about wanting to get Christian out as leader at Red Bull. And Netflix may have played this up a little bit, but I've had the same thought, is that he has his suspicions, I think, about Yas in this episode. Moving over to episode 2, it's called Frenemies. It's obviously Lando Norris versus Max Verstappen. And this one it really tells the story of how different these two guys are. Lando Norris is kind of happy-go-lucky. He takes the sport seriously, but he doesn't take it too seriously. Whereas Max Verstappen, it almost seems like, watching this episode, it almost kind of seems like the best analogy I could give it is Rocky versus Drago, and in Rocky, I think it was 3 or 4. Max reminds me of Drago so much, whereas Max is so focused on racing and like by any means necessary, he's going to win the race, and whereas Lando's kind of that Rocky character where he's happy if he wins. He's a little bit downtrodden if he loses, but he doesn't treat it as the end of the world. And you can kind of see that this is the first time you think that maybe Lando needs to change the way he acts, on the Formula One track when it comes to Max Verstappen and trying to win a world championship. And I think the biggest thing for me in this episode was the absolute delusional behavior that came from Red Bull at Austria when Max Verstappen literally, I think, I feel like at least, that Max Verstappen takes out Lando Norris. And to listen to Red Bull absolutely be like, oh, this is Lando Norris's fault. How can you blame Max Verstappen for this? And I mean, it was just delusional behavior from Red Bull, whereas every other, I think, team and Lando and McLaren, they all knew there was nothing he did wrong there in that move that eventually took out Lando from that race. And then Red Bull is like, no, we did nothing wrong. It's all McLaren. It's all the other guys that are mistaken on this move. So episode 3 is totally about Mercedes and George Russell and kind of what they're needing to do now that Lewis Hamilton is going to be leaving Mercedes, and kind of showing the evolution of what it's going to look like with George at the leadership helm, and what he's got to do to prove that he's the leader that Mercedes needs. And the only note that I wrote down for this episode, and this is I think the thing that really stuck out in my head about this episode, and it's sad that it does because Netflix does a really horrible job here in this episode as far as storytelling goes. And it's the Belgium Grand Prix in which, George makes the leadership call about staying out on the hard compounded tires all the way till the end and winning the race. But the problem is we all know when we watch that Belgium Grand Prix that, yes, he did win it on the track, but then later on he ends up getting disqualified for having an underweight car. And the thing that bothers me is Netflix acts like that didn't even happen, that they completely gloss over the fact that George Russell gets disqualified from the race and Lewis Hamilton ends up winning. I get the whole, you're trying to prove your leadership, and this is what that episode is all about, is, George being able to step up and become the new leader of Mercedes. But you can't gloss over the fact that he ends up getting disqualified in this episode or in this race, and they completely gloss over it. Now, granted, I've yet to watch the last 5 episodes, so maybe they'll cover it then, but I just feel it's really deceptive of Netflix to not then at least put a disclaimer in there or something saying, it ended up being George Russell gets disqualified, Lewis Hamilton takes the victory, because it was still a win for Mercedes. And I think, this whole episode being about Mercedes in general and what they were going to do with that second seat, I think it wasn't like it was going to ruin that whole episode. I think, if anything, it added a little bit more to it. So I don't like the fact that they just glossed over the George Russell disqualification in Belgium. So episode 4, Carlos Sainz. So this episode is all about Carlos Sainz and where he was going to go to. And I love the fact that, they talked about Williams here. They talked about Kick and the potential of them signing him. So to most of us, I think, in the F1 world, we knew it was a 2-team battle about, who was going to sign him, because obviously with Kick, eventually becoming Audi in 2026, we all believed, with his dad's, relationship with Audi, it was going to be just a matter of time before he made that move. But I think the big thing that I didn't know as an F1 fan in this whole story, from Carlos Sainz's point of view, was he was all ready to sign that contract, I think weeks prior. But then Flavio Briatore, the most polarizing man in F1 today, steps in at the last minute after he took over leadership at Alpine. he stepped in last minute and made a last minute ditch effort to get Carlos Sainz signed to Alpine. And I had no idea about this. We all knew about there were two teams in the fight, but I don't remember anything being said about a potential that Alpine was going to step in and sign him. And I thought this was really interesting, and they did a really good job of explaining, the goods of Flavio, what good he was, but then also what bad he was in the way that he helped Renault. Allegedly, they cheated, but he was found to have not. I guess they found him not liable for the cheating, and so they dropped his whole, banning from the sport. And there's a lot of people out there with a lot of opinions on it, and I could talk about it in another video, but I think it was just very interesting to see Flavio talk about, wanting to bring Carlos Sainz into the team, and he was willing to do absolutely just about anything to get Carlos there. But obviously Carlos Sainz with Williams, and I think it was a really good, good guy, bad guy story. You kind of see Kick in there for a little bit, but then it obviously drops Kick out, and then brings in Alpine. It was just a really good episode, and I loved all the thought process that went between Carlos and his cousin, who's also his agent. It was a really good episode, and you could kind of see the decisions behind, what was being made between teams and then between Carlos. And then episode 5 is the Curse of Leclerc. It's a really good episode. This is all about his victory in Monaco, but it was a really good chance to really hear Charles Leclerc's story about growing up as a kid, his father, and Leclerc growing up to try to get into racing and try to get into Formula One, and then obviously the sad story of his dad kind of being on his deathbed. And something I didn't know, again, it's something that I learned here new, which is Netflix has done a really good job of this. With his dad being on his deathbed, a couple weeks away from, obviously the date that he ends up passing, Charles ends up lying to his dad about getting a contract in Formula One. And it's, that, as a son, you want to make your dad proud, and he knew that was going to make his dad proud, and he didn't know if he was going to ever get that opportunity to actually tell him, that he's made it to Formula One. And so I see why he did it. It's just, it's heartbreaking, the story, to see Charles Leclerc, but it's that heartbreak then to absolute, agony and the curse that he's had at Monaco for years, crash outs, not being able to start races, poor pit strategies. And then the big boost up of 2024 is where Charles wins at Monaco. And it's a great arc in that episode where you kind of learn about Charles, and then move on to all the curses he's had at Monaco, and then to have everything come together and to be able to win at Monaco. Just an absolutely great story by Netflix in this one. And like I said, great job, Netflix, with this episode. So everyone, that's the first 5 episodes of Netflix's Drive to Survive. We got 5 more episodes to watch, and I'll cover that in another video. And then I'll do another video where we'll cover the last 5 episodes. And then I'll do another video just talking about the series in general and what Netflix did right and what they did wrong. But guys, let me know in the comment section down below what you guys thought of the first 5 episodes of Drive to Survive. Was it good? Was it bad? What did you guys see in those first 5 episodes that maybe I missed or maybe other F1 fans missed? Let me know that in the comment section down below, guys. And as always, hit a like on this video. It helps push this video out to more and more Formula One fans and Drive to Survive fans. And then if you are new to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. It means the absolute world to me. But guys, thank you so much for watching this video. And guys, for the American F1 fan, I'm Eric Ringel, signing off.